A couple of quick thank yous. I want to say thank you to our IT department, Bronson Lewis, who's joining us today, and Dwayne Hunter. I think that all of us that are doing these nowadays are greatly appreciative of these folks. They help us get them done and help them function fairly smoothly. Even for those of us that may not be the best operators in the world, they help us work through it okay. So Bronson, a big thank you to you and the department there working with us. The other thank you goes to our Ag Comm department, Dave Deakins and Ed. And doggone, I can't remember Ed's last name. I'm so sorry, Ed. But for their coming out and filming the videos at the research station and working with us, and then getting those videos around and edited and together and over to Bronson so they can be played today. We really appreciate their work and working with us as well. We appreciate the support of the Field Research Service Unit under Dr. Chris Richards' leadership there, and our station superintendent here, who's going to be joining us as our moderator this morning. Certainly appreciate their support in working with us on that, and all that they do for the work going on in the station and in putting together this virtual field tour here today. One last note that I'd like to recognize in terms of appreciations, our administration. We certainly appreciate them and all that they do in supporting these efforts. I think it nearly goes without saying that we would all rather be doing these field tours and field days in person. That's where we sense more of the meat of the matter when we're actually standing out there in front of the plots and working and answering questions as we go around, and you guys can see what we're doing in the field. But given situation as it is and dealing with the pandemic as we are right now, that's just not possible this year. So we've had a lot of support from our administration in putting together these virtual field days so you can still see what we are doing out and about in the state and the work efforts that are still going on in terms of Oklahoma State University and Division of Ag Sciences and Natural Resources for our clientele, the Oklahoma agriculture producer. So with all that, we welcome you here today, and I believe Dr. Taylor is on with us. And Dr. Taylor, would you care just to say a couple of quick words to our group?
Well, yeah, Gary, I think you took my speech from me, though. You know, I like going to field days. I've always liked field days, and it's really nice to walk through the field and see the crops and all the things we're looking at. But I do appreciate everyone on your team and your leadership on making this happen, and, you know, given the restrictions that we've got. I mean, shooting the videos and pulling the whole team together. It's adapting and you know, working within the situation that we've given. So thanks to you and your team. We got a little sneak preview yesterday of some of the stuff, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm really looking forward to seeing all the stuff today and hearing the questions that people have. So thanks, Gary.
You're welcome, and thank you again for your support and us being able to put this together. Just right before we get started here on that, I'll tell you that our bit of our format this morning is going to be, we will have the video of our extension specialist in front of their plots, and we'll play that video, and then our extension specialist is going to join us live to be able to answer questions and interact with us this morning. Although I am working with one of our speakers this morning who's having some technical issues with his sound system, so we'll Dr. Bauman, we'll see if we can get that figured out as we switch off here. So with that, I think, Bronson, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and cue up our introductory video, and I'm gonna switch out, and our moderator for this morning, Mr. Mike Schultz, station superintendent here, is going to come in and take the lead for us as moderator today. So with that, Bronson, let's go ahead and cue up the introductory video and get started from there.
Hey, I wanted to welcome everybody to our first day of our virtual tour here at the Southwest Research and Extension Center here in Altus, Oklahoma. With me today I have Mike Schultz, and Mike is the station manager. And Mike, why don't you give us an overview of the station?
Thanks, Aaron. Again, yeah, welcome to the Southwest Area Extension and Research Center. We do a variety of different work here. The station itself encompasses about 200 acres, several hundred different plots under research right now. Everything from dryland cotton, dryland wheat, irrigated wheat, 2 systems of irrigation, both flood and fur irrigated, as well as drip irrigation. We'll also do some work with grain sorghum, sesame, and guar on the station as well. Again, I hope you enjoy the next couple of days of the field tour, and welcome to Altus.
Thank you, Mike. And at this time, we're going to end this short video, and Mike's going to pick us back up and introduce our first speaker for the day. Thank you.
Again, want to say a welcome to Southwest Oklahoma and the virtual field tour for the Southwest Research and Extension Center. It's an absolutely beautiful day for the first day of fall here in Southwest Oklahoma. It's also a very busy time of year. Lots of groundwork being done, from wheat ground preparation, wheat sowing, some cotton starting to be defoliated in this part of the state. I'm sure that's going to pick up as the week goes on. Just a couple of reminders of housekeeping. This is being recorded and will be posted and archived. If you want to go back and view something later, or if somebody wants to go back in and watch this at a later date, it will be archived and posted. And also, if you would keep your microphones muted at the end of each video, the presenter will be with us live. And if you have questions for them, you can unmute yourself and ask at that time, or you can type it in the chat box, and the presenters can see those questions, as well as we'll pass those along and make sure that they see them. So Bronson, if you would, let's cue up our first presenter. Is Dr. Seth Bird. He is a state extension cotton specialist, does work all over the state, certainly does a lot of important work in the area of cotton. And Bronson, if you could cue up Seth's video at this time.
Good morning, I'm Seth Bird, Extension Cotton Specialist, and we're here in Altus this morning. I'm going to cover some topics regarding research we're doing here at the station, as well as just cotton in the southwest part of the state in general. So I'm currently in an irrigation trial that we're conducting with Dr. Jason Warren. This is on some of our new drip irrigation here at the farm in Altus, and we're really looking at optimizing irrigation scheduling for producers that have drip in this part of the state, mainly those that are irrigating in the district. And so that's been a pretty big topic. A lot of our producers here have drip irrigation, and there's some questions about optimizing the use of that water. So moving forward, this is going to be one of the probably bigger projects that we're working on as a group at Oklahoma State to try to get some answers for our growers. Now, most folks associate this part of the state with our main area, or primary area of cotton production in Oklahoma. And so there's a lot of interest always in variety testing, both from a producer standpoint, since it's a very big market. A lot of varieties fit this environment, and also for our seed companies to understand, where their offerings fit in southwest Oklahoma. And we have sort of the benefit of being a little bit longer season environment than some of the other areas of Texas and Oklahoma. A little bit more rainfall than you'll see west of here as you move up into the high plains. Again, some areas have fairly good irrigation, at least relative to some of the surrounding areas, and particularly moving down into Texas. And so we have that sort of high-end environment, high-end yield environment, where you can really push those 4.5 bale numbers if the year is conducive to it. But we also have a lot of dry land, and Oklahoma is primarily a dry land state. Most of our acres are not irrigated in the state, and so there's a lot of interest in both irrigated and dry land production, and irrigated and dry land varieties and how they fit. here. So on this farm, a lot of the trials that we do in the cotton agronomy program are related to variety evaluations. We have multiple levels of evaluating cotton varieties in our program. A lot of it starts with company trials where we're looking at varieties that may not be on the market for 3 to 4 years down the road, if at all, and really looking at, does this experimental variety have a fit in our environment? And those are really neat to do. We get kind of a jump on looking at varieties so that, when that variety is commercial in several years, we've got some history with it. We have some data. We understand maybe where it fits and where it doesn't, and then maybe some characteristics about it that make it unique. We also do what we call official variety tests. This year, those are actually being located in the Panhandle to get a little bit of data up there, but that's where we take varieties from multiple companies. We usually have 30 to 40 entries, and we're evaluating these varieties all against each other in one trial. So it's a little more public look at maybe some varieties that are new or maybe a year away from being released. But again, we get that valuable information on how those varieties perform. And then probably the most well-known or popular variety comparisons or evaluations we do are our on-farm variety trials. We call them RACE trials, so it stands for Replicated Agronomic Cotton Evaluations. And in those trials, we partner with producers across the state, but obviously we have a lot that are located in the southwest corner, and we really put varieties in their hands. So we let producers take 10 to 12 varieties from multiple seed companies, and they plant them, they manage them, and they harvest them, so they're treated the way those producers would manage cotton. And then we get sort of a real-world look at variety performance under the management of these producers. And we have several of those trials located this year around the Altus area. So we have an irrigated and dryland trial in Jackson County, another irrigated and dryland trial in Tillman County, and then a dryland trial within Greer County. So there's 5 that just sort of border or in Jackson County. We had another irrigated trial in Harmon that we lost to some early season weather conditions. So that gives us a good knowledge of variety performance in producers' hands for this area. So jumping ahead, so we're in mid-September now, so obviously all thoughts are going to be quickly turned into harvest dates, and especially this year we've kind of been a little ahead of schedule, or maybe we've been more right on schedule than we have in years past. A lot of the crop is going to be finishing up either by mid-September, by the end of the month. The cotton I'm standing in right now, you see there's some blooms at the top. This cotton was actually late planted. This was planted June 12th, and so we're not really looking at this as a good example for what most folks are dealing with, but a lot of folks are dealing with cotton that's starting to open. And by September 22nd or 23rd, when this airs, probably going to be a lot of cotton in the state that has some cracked bolls in the field, if not, maybe ready to have a harvest date application. So there's a few things that have happened this year that are going to kind of govern or maybe need to factor into our decision making. And really the predominant thing has been what's happened in really the last 6 weeks. We entered August in pretty good shape across the state, whether you were irrigated or dry land, which is a pretty big feat. We had some pretty timely rainfalls for dry land earlier in the year. And so that made a lot of folks pretty optimistic about our dry land yields. August for much of the Southwest was pretty hot and dry, so we had some pretty harsh conditions. We certainly had some dry land cotton that drought stressed, got a little heat stress on it. Irrigated, not so much. Irrigated, being able to apply water in those dry periods really helps. So we're probably facing some pretty high-end yields on our irrigated, which is going to likely mean we're going to have a decent amount of leaf that we need to take care of when it comes to harvest dates. So on the irrigated side, really focusing in on getting optimal leaf drop will be key. So that's going to really factor into our products that we select on the defoliant side of our tank mix for harvest aids. Of course, the earlier we're applying these harvest aids, the greater likelihood we have of applying them in warm conditions, which is great. It's really favorable for our products to have warmer conditions to work in. We usually get really good boll opening and really good leaf drop in those conditions. But it also raises the potential for an issue down the road after we apply these products. We get good leaf drop, we get good boll opening, then we get a rain shower. And that warm weather, that combination can really spur some regrowth. So be very, aware of the forecast, particularly that sort of short-term 10-day forecast after we're applying these harvest aids. If there's a chance of rain and the weather's looking fairly warm and there's a lot of sunny days, so conditions are high for regrowth, include a regrowth inhibitor in that harvest aid mix. And it can really save us some time. It can save us from having to go out and make a second application, and it can help with potentially grades if we get regrowth that's bad enough. Finish up on sort of the common question that we've been getting lately. I think between the hot weather we had and then this kind of cool spell we had in early September, a lot of the dryland cotton has sort of started to turn very rapidly. And you've got some dryland that sort of turned, and it's very, that general senescence, natural reddening and yellowing of leaves. They start to senesce and fall off naturally, and a lot of bulbs are opening. So we're seeing that, but we're also seeing that in combination with a lot of leaf spotting, some almost wilt-like characteristics. And so I think what we have going on is a combination of you had some drought stress early on, which probably enhanced a lot of that leaf age that we saw. A lot of the fruit up top was shed, so that plant was really focused in on those lower and middle set bolls. Of course, we had that cold spell in early September about a week ago, around the 8th, I guess 2 weeks ago by the time this airs. And that was accompanied by a lot of rain. And so we're probably seeing a combination of some effects of the heat and drought stress that we had in August kind of taking a toll on more mature plants, in combination with the cool wet weather that we saw, maybe feeling some wet weather blight type symptoms or general leaf spots that we tend to see from plants that maybe are feeding a lot of bulbs or have a big draw on those leaves. And so we're starting to see maybe some cade run out of the leaves. It just makes those plants more susceptible to some of our late season pathogens, but these aren't, the bacterial blight or the verticillium wilt that would be much more of a concern. This is probably just some leaf spotting. Most of the pictures that we're seeing in most of the fields I've been in, this is occurring on plants that have 1 or 2 open bolls and have a fairly high proportion of the bolls, or all the bolls in the plant, are fairly well along in maturity. They're hard, they're harvestable, so nothing that really needs to be done, but potentially something that needs to be taken into account when we do go and spray harvest aids and start looking at fields for harvest aid applications and what products we're going to use. So in summary, that's my late season cotton management update. I know it's fairly general. I'll be around for questions when this airs, so if there are any, please feel free to ask, and I'll answer what I can. I do want to quickly thank my Oklahoma State collaborators that you've seen speak here today. We have a fairly active cotton team, and hopefully we're answering questions and bringing some things to the table that you guys appreciate. I want to thank the Oklahoma Cotton Commission for the support of everything that we do in my program, research-wise and just in general. And also Cotton Incorporated Oklahoma State Support Committee for their support of our research here in Oklahoma.
Thanks, Seth. Seth, you talked a lot about regrowth after we've already applied a defoliant, a leaf drop, and a bowl opener. I notice as we look around the country right now, we've got a lot of cotton, especially cotton that may have stressed a little bit right here in the southwest corner where we've had abundant rainfall over the last 3 to 4 weeks. Some of that cotton starting to regrow right now. Could you kind of give us a strategy of what we could do right now as we initially defoliate to help address some of that regrowth?
Yeah, so we're in Fort Cobb today, and we're seeing some cotton that has not been defoliated yet starting to have a little bit of regrowth. That's not uncommon when you have warm weather, and we've had some decent moisture lately, so there's probably some moisture down the profile that those plants are able to access, and the more bulbs they open naturally, the more sort of just free time they have to put any of these resources towards new growth or regrowth. So before a first pass, it's usually pretty, I say easy. It's something you can easily address but you need to factor in the finances of putting in a product like a Didazaron plus Diuron, so that'd be a Genstar, Adios, Ready Pick type product. If you've got a little bit of regrowth and the forecast is not real bad coming up, you can run even a 2-ounce rate with a normal defoliation pass and see some benefits from that. And that will really give you control of the regrowth that's coming. Your normal defoliants, whether it's tribufos or PPO, most of those will take care of the little regrowth that we have right now that's on the plant. So take care of what's there. Normal defoliants, you can even drop the rates a little bit if you're going to put Genstar in, because it'll give you some defoliation properties too. And then that Genstar type product will also give you a little bit of insurance moving forward.
Seth, a couple of questions that have popped up in the chat box, and we'll kind of stay on this late season before we go to the other one. And the question is, I've got cotton that's dropped all of its leaves. Was this an environmental stress, or was this genetics of the plant?
Yeah, so not so much genetics, because you'll see it happen to a certain extent every year, regardless of variety. I've seen it happen every year I can remember. Just random plants, you'll see them just completely defoliate, and it's some sort of combination of stresses. It's probably not just one or two things. We've had a lot of cotton start to defoliate on its own this year, and most of that has been due to the last 4 to 6 weeks of conditions it's been exposed to. If you're seeing a difference between varieties, it could be as simple as one variety is an earlier maturing variety than the one beside it, or in another field or another part of the field. And so if you're earlier maturing, you probably got a lower boll set, probably set those harvestable bollos in a tighter window of time. And so when we've gone through this weather, your fruit has been further matured than a variety that might be a later maturing variety. So it's more conducive to be ready to drop leaves at this time of year compared to one that's probably got a little bit greener leaf to it. And we're seeing that in our variety trials as well. When we have varieties right side by side in the field, you can see some huge visual impacts of maturity class in our on-farm variety trials right now. So it probably is a majority of an environmental issue, but obviously genetics or variety maturity is going to play a role in how far along that variety is at this time of the year.
So we've had a couple of questions pop up in the chat box. Any of our participants, you have a question that you want to ask live? We've got a couple of more to ask, but want to give you a chance if you've got one. I'm going to take that as a no. A couple other questions, Seth, and kind of staying on this same topic of, late season cotton management, making a decision of when to defoliate. We always have an argument about, when is our last opportunity for a bloom to set a mature boll. And I know there's a lot of factors that go into that. But Seth, if you could kind of explore that a little bit, give us an idea of when we think that last boll may be mature and ready for a defoliant.
Yeah, I guess as far as the last effective bloom date, which may be what they're referring to, depends on where you're at in Oklahoma, but since we're on the Southwest Field Day, most of the southwest part of the state is going to be sort of from October 20th to the end of the month, year to year. If you look back at just heat units exclusively, they kind of are going to fall into that range most of the time. Obviously, the later you go into August, the less chance that you're going to have to develop the heat units needed for that boll to fully open and mature and have good fiber quality. And there could be some years where you can open a boll into September and get that. You look at this year, I think between the weather we had, I guess 2 weeks ago now, and then the weather we're having some of this week, as far as temperatures go and cloud cover, we're going to be struggling to open anything that was set in that probably the last few days of August. And I'd say anything early September this year is going to be a real struggle. So the general, I guess, safe space to be in is sort of August 20th to about the 26th, 27th, according to what we've seen, at least the last 10 years or so with data.
Very good. Any other questions before we move on to our next presenter? All right, Seth, we certainly appreciate all that you do. Appreciate your time with us this morning. Hopefully you'll get to hang around and listen in on some more of this. And if there's any questions, we'll certainly try to get those passed along to you. So we're going to move on now and talk about weed management strategies for weed control. We have with us Dr. Todd Bauman, who is the IAB Weed Science Program Leader. I know Todd does a lot of weed work all across the state of a lot of different stations. Certainly does some down here in the southwest corner. Extremely important work that we do right now in the area of trying to keep our weeds, our fields weed free. Gets to be a bigger challenge every year with resistance and some of the tolerance and some of the things that we see creeping in. So Bronson, if we could, Todd, are you joining us on a mic right now?
Yes, can y'all hear me?
Yep, we got you now. Very good. We've been having some difficulties getting Todd connected in on a mic check. Sounds like we got him. Bronson, let's go ahead and cue up Todd's video, and then we'll have a time after that to pick his brain and ask him about weed control.
We're here at the Oklahoma State University Research and Extension Center at Altus, where we have the opportunity to do our cotton weed control research. I would like to thank a couple of groups, the Oklahoma Agriculture Experiment Station, for allowing, for a weed scientist, this is extremely important to have a place where you can have weeds, and we actually have an area across from here that we let go fallow. And we rotate these every other year, and that gives us a uniform population. And if it wasn't for the support of the experiment station, we wouldn't have fields like this that we could do our research. So we appreciate their help with this. In addition, the research here at this station is supported by the Cotton Incorporated and the Oklahoma cotton growers through their checkoff dollars that support this research so that we can address weed control issues that growers have and look at different herbicide programs, look at managing resistant weeds. The primary weed that we have at this station is Palmer amaranth, or pigweed. This is a Roundup or glyphosate resistant population, which is what a lot of our growers are dealing with today. So that allows us to look at management plans for that particular weed and develop programs. This year, in this particular location, we're looking at both the Extend Flex technology, which is tolerant to the dicamba chemistry, and we're also looking at the Enlist technology, which is tolerant to 2,4-D. We have 4 studies looking at the Extend technology and 1 study looking at the Enlist. The Enlist study is a matching study of one of our Extend studies, where we're looking at various pre-emergence programs, either alone or in combination with staple, and seeing how those work with helping us manage this population and using those products in those new technologies, both because we know we need a residual herbicide up front and what works best, and also so we can protect that technology so we don't end up potentially with resistance to those technologies like we have with the Roundup Ready technology. This is the second year of those 2 studies. One of the things that we have seen in those particular studies is we had an opportunity to look at an older product. The active ingredient in it is famecifin. It's sold as either Reflex or Sinister in cotton, and we've had excellent results with that particular product, especially in front of either the dicamba or the Enlist post-emergence. We've also looked at this particular study at our Fort Cobb research station, and we've seen excellent results both with pigweed control and also with yellow nutsedge control at that particular location. While those residuals have looked extremely good and they are very important, the new technologies have added a tremendous amount of value following up those residual herbicides, and we've getting excellent control when we follow that up with 1 to 2 applications. In those studies, we're also the last application that goes up. We include a residual application of metolachlor with those products, and we see a definite benefit to having that kind of that season-long residual there with that last application to control any later emerging weeds. Again, the hope of that program is not only to benefit our weed control, but also to give us another mode of action where we potentially don't have future resistant issues like we've seen in the past. From the study that we had last year, seeing the results that we saw with famecifin, we started a study this year looking at it alone and in combination with other residual herbicides, things like Caparol, Direx, metolachlor, Warrant, some of those types of products. And we've seen excellent results with those. I think the key that we've seen from this work, because we also have some post-only, especially with the Extend technology. We also looked at the Liberty technology alone. And the last 2 years has been definite proof that we need a residual herbicide up front. There's a couple of reasons for that. Cotton, especially early in the growing season, is not as competitive. And if you let those weeds get a jump on it, in a lot of cases that cotton really never catches up throughout the entire season. So we see a real benefit to having that residual up front. I will say in general, kind of the way that the weather played out last year versus this year, we saw a lot better results with our residuals. They didn't seem to work quite as well or last quite as long. I think a lot of that had to do with the early season weather conditions. We didn't get quite as good at activating rainfall early season, and then I think the colder weather may have played an impact to that. But even with the less results this year compared to last year, we still saw a tremendous benefit to having that residual herbicide up front. Where we try to do a post only, while we can eventually get control of those weeds, we definitely see a detrimental effect on that early season growth and the performance of that cotton. And like I said, you never really see it catch up throughout the season. So again, one of the things that we're primarily trying to do here is try to develop programs that can work for growers in their current situation, and also increase the long-term viability of the new technologies that we're looking at.
Thank you, Todd. I can tell you as a producer, every time I drive by those weed plots, I kind of shake a little bit, but understand that's extremely important work that's going on right now where we are in production and fighting resistance and tolerance, not just in careless weeds, but some other weed varieties that are starting to develop that as well. Todd, you might talk just a little bit about the size of weeds and how to, we always hear it's easier to control weeds the smaller they are, and I think that's a point that we probably can't emphasize enough.
Well, I think the glyphosate technology obviously spoiled us a little bit with the fact that we could get away, at least in some cases, and especially when we were dealing with pigweeds. But even with that technology, when we were dealing with things like morning glories, in some cases, some of the grass species, nutsedge, timing was even important with that technology. But since we've lost the ability for that technology to perform like it did in the past, when we look at the technologies like the dicamba and the list, while they have been extremely valuable tools that's been added to our toolbox, if we let those things, we've seen proof where they start getting, say, over 8 or 12 inches tall, we lose some of the ability to control that with that single application. and then we look at something like Liberty, you know, for some cases where growers got in a situation where that was a product that they had to use. Generally speaking, with our drier climates in Oklahoma, if weeds get much over, say, 2 to 4 inches tall, we start to see that product either not necessarily fail, but not perform to the level that we would like to see. The other thing that we get into is rather than being able to stretch, say, that second application out with those products, we've got to come back in and say 10 or 14 days and hit it that second time so that we kind of get that complete control and that finish up on those larger weeds. And we have seen that with some of the timing stuff that we've done, that you can do that. If you follow that second application, you kind of get some of that foliage burn off and you get better coverage with that second application. But where we'd like to, say, be making that application, say, 4 weeks later to get that next flush of weeds, we're having to do it a lot earlier to control that set that we've got out there. The other problem, like I said in the video, cotton is not the most competitive plant out there, especially early in the season, and you lose some of that competitive advantage if you let those weeds compete with that cotton early season. And we take a year like this year where we could be up against the wall potentially from a maturity standpoint. In some of these cases, you don't want to lose any of that early season growth.
So, Todd, you spend a little bit of time there talking about, you know, multiple applications. You also talked about different modes of action. How is it important in a production system, you know, to not just get stuck in on one of our products, whether it's a pre-emergence? Should we continue to mix up our mode of action and our chemistries, even in our pre-emergence, as we make multiple applications in that?
Well, I think from a weed science standpoint, we were preaching that even with the initial introduction of the Roundup Ready technology. Unfortunately, growers were able to get by with that without, but I think we've seen the proof of how important alternating those modes of action can be to us because of the loss, at least on a lot of our grower fields, or the lack of performance from that technology. There's no doubt if we try to use any of the technologies that we're dealing with today, like we used to Roundup and overuse those, we're going to eventually lose those technologies as well. That's one of the reasons why I really prefer to see us use a different pre-emergence up front rather than, say, the duals, warrants, those types of products, because I really like to see those go out post-emergence to give us that extended residual. Those products work pretty well in those situations. They're a pretty cheap residual alternative to add to your dicamba or Enlist, Liberty, or Roundup tank mixes. So using a different residual, whether that be a yellow herbicide, depending on what situation we're in, or using one of the, Caparol Directs or the Sinister Reflex. Of course, as our growers are well aware of, the one concern, the Sinister and Reflex, we've had excellent results with that. That's a great product, but you've got to be concerned what that's going to do to you from a residual standpoint. Essentially, we're looking at in Oklahoma, in most cases, you're going to have to come back to cotton that following year if you use one of those products.
God, I think that's a great point. As we use more and more of these products, it's extremely important that we're looking and reading those plant back labels, dates and times, and we don't get ourselves into a situation that we do something in June or July that's going to cause us to make different decisions, for the next 12 months. So a question that came in on the chat box, do you feel like we still get some activity out of the glyphosate in pigweed settings, and is it still worth including in a tank mix setting in our applications?
Well, I think a couple of cases, yes, we do. And we've seen this both at Altus and our research station that we do soybean research work at Bixby, and then also at our Fort Cobb. Not all of our population is resistant. Out there, we don't have 100% glyphosate resistant pigweed population. And we'll see some cases, especially if we have some larger escapes, that are tolerant to Roundup, that we'll see that actually burn down that pigweed. So we see a benefit there. The other thing that we see is generally that's not the only weed we're dealing with. We definitely see a benefit from a grass control standpoint with the glyphosate. So if you're dealing with Colorado grass, crabgrass, or red springletop, which we have in the district, you see a benefit to having that additional glyphosate out there to help control any escapes, say, that get by one of our yellow herbicides up early season. So I definitely think we still see a benefit to having that in the tank with us.
Okay. Any questions from our participants that hadn't come in on the chat box yet that they want to ask live? Todd, before we let you go and finish up, I know these are usually discussions we have in the off season, but unfortunately this year during the season we had a lot of discussion, a lot of changes in dicamba, some pressures on the enlist technologies as well. Any updates on where any of that relabeling efforts are, or anything that you want to talk about before we're done today?
Well, a couple of things. As far as my understanding, they are continuing to move forward with that relabeling. That was a process that was going to have to take place anyway. All of those dicamba labels basically were going to end at the end of the 2020 year. So they were going to have to be relabeled. So that process had kind of already been in place prior to the court ruling that we had. Those are moving forward. The original thought was we'd know sometime in the October timeframe. Hopefully that hasn't pushed back. But I also think that also supports the need to having that residual up front so that we're not totally reliant on some of these other products. And if something does happen, whatever that may be, a shortage of the product, a labeling issue, other things like that we don't have all of our, say, eggs in one basket, but we've got a program approach that we can adjust. And where that really helped was if a guy has to roll into, say, a Liberty program, that gives him a lot more time to be timely with that Liberty application, so that because it can be effective, it's just a timing issue with that product.
I'll pop in on you here too. Todd, can you mute yours? Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, Gary, I've got you.
Okay. We're echoing a little bit because where Mike and I are at, but you know, one of the things to get from guys that are just starting into cotton there is that it can be a costly crop to plant and to utilize. And, you know, I'll hear this sometimes. Do you feel like that season-long weed approach from a pre-merge to onto your post-merge chemical, is it really necessary? Do we need to take that season-long approach when we're dealing with this crop? And in a lot of ways, you've already addressed that, but maybe hit that one more time there.
Well, I mean, you don't necessarily have to be 100% clean, but the thing that you have to think about, especially when you start thinking about harvesting efficiency, being able to harvest that crop efficiently, that comes into play. And then also when you start thinking about grades, you know, you don't want a bunch of trash or leaf grade to come in there from a weed standpoint that could ultimately lower those grades and lower the price of that crop. So I think that's where some of that season-long approach also comes into play.
All right, very good. I think Todd's going to stay with us for the rest of the tour. If you do have any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll make sure that we circle back to them before we're finished today and get all of those answered. Todd, thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for your time this morning. And if there's any other questions pop up, we'll make sure that we get those to you. Our last presenter today is Dr. Brian Arnold. He is the Precision Nutrient Management Extension Specialist, and that is a mouthful. I know one of the things as a producer down here that's really come into play over the last decade is we no longer can just go out there and throw some nitrogen phosphorus out on our irrigated crop and make the really high yields that we need in today's production environment to be successful, and nutrients in the right relationships with each other according to what the soil needs continues to be a bigger and bigger issue. Of course, then the precision side of that is really starting to play a lot in to only apply what we need in certain areas. So Bronson, if you could, let's cue up Brian's video, and then we'll open it up for questions after that.
We're in the long-term fertility block in Altus, Oklahoma. This was set up in 1979 by Dr. Billy Tucker to look at a combination of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium management in cotton production. Now, these plots have gained us a lot of information over the years. We've looked at the nitrogen response. We've looked at the impact of nitrogen in potassium fertilizer, go with correlation with those on yield and quality. But in 2013, we stopped applying nutrients to these plots because of the drought that we had in 11 and 12. We kind of held off, and since 2013, we haven't fertilized these plots. However, we've been taking harvest off of them every single year. And so what I'm standing in today is between a couple of the treatments that are still showing positive treatment response. Now, it's not due to pH, and I can show you in a little bit, it's not due to phosphorus and potassium. We deep sampled these plots 2 years ago before the establishment of the 2019 crop, and found in many plots we still had over 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre at the 3 to 4 foot depth. Now, the plot I'm standing in right now, you can see it's nice and green behind me. It's not big cotton, but it's definitely nitrogen responsive. This plot received 200 pounds of nitrogen over the lifespan of that from 1979 up to 2013. And you can see on the border right here that didn't get nitrogen, we still have a good nitrogen response between there. Now we go across a couple rows over there, that's a 120 pound rate, which is more of apt to what you would see a producer apply in this region. So 120 pounds of nitrogen applied every year from 1979 on, along with phosphorus and potassium, and we still have a response even though it's been that many years since we last fertilized. I mean, folks, we're over 7 years without the application of nitrogen, and we're still seeing a nitrogen response on these soils. That leads us to start thinking about how are we managing our nitrogen on these long-term irrigated fields. Are we over applying? What do we have at depth? It really makes us start thinking about, do we need to be looking at deep nitrate samples? Again, 2 years ago, I can go to these plots, and 2 4 foot deep, we would have 100 to 200 pounds. That is significant. We're starting to look at this data and see how long can we mine out this soil and look at it and not lose any soil beneficial qualities. We've got a lot of work to do, but it's really interesting to see. And one last plot I'd like to show you is right over here, just to show that it wasn't the P and K that gave us the benefit, but this plot right here has had the same P and K as the plot I was standing in, but it never had nitrogen. So it's not the additional phosphorus, it's not the additional potassium that's giving you the yield. It is residual to nitrogen almost a decade after we stopped fertilizing. Now we're in another part of the field where I have an ongoing study that looks at the timing of nitrogen in cotton production. And so right behind me, we're looking at the pre-plant plots. So at Stillwater, Altus, and Fort Cobb, we have a range of treatments that go from 0 to 120 pounds of nitrogen pre-plant, along with an in-season application of the same rates applied at First Pinhead Square. And so those in-season receive no pre-plant nitrogen. We're wanting to look at the delay of nitrogen impact on growth characteristics, on yield characteristics. Now, it's really interesting if we compare what it looks like here at Altus, which is under drip irrigation, versus Fort Cobb and versus in Stillwater. So here at Altus, we look at our pre-plant. Our pre-plant right here is a much bigger plant. It's got good boll set for what we're looking at in the season that we have. And over there, we have the in-season application, and you can see it's a much shorter plant. We still have green, but the bolls are smaller. We don't have as much. If you look at our other locations, like in Stillwater and Fort Cobb, we have a smaller plant, but we have just as many bolls, if not more bolls, on the in-season application. And I believe that has a lot to do with the irrigation or just the management. So in Altus, when we came in here, this pre-plant, we applied it, it got a rain on, and it was actually incorporated after it was put down, but the in-season was applied and it sat there. No rain, no incorporation, and that in-season application just sat there for a significant period of time without incorporation into the root zone. Fort Cobb is irrigated via sprinkler, so we have a pivot over the top, and so it's watered in. So when we applied nitrogen at Fort Cobb, it was irrigated in within 48 hours of application. At our Stillwater location, when we applied it, we had a good season of rain, and it rained within 72 hours of application. Both of those locations are going to show no significant decrease in yield due to the delay of timing. In fact, the plants are more petite, they're smaller, they didn't get as rank with early season growth, and so likely harvestability is going to be better, and I'm really excited to see how the yield and the quality turns out. Except here at Altus, again, when we look at Altus and the drip irrigation, that side dress probably hurt us significantly because it wasn't able to get incorporated via rain or irrigation. And so as we start talking about nitrogen management, the circumstance of how we're irrigating or if we're rain-fed and where we're at on rain-fed really starts coming in impact. I really like in-season nitrogen application on cotton. I really prefer to move it from pre-plant to in-season. However, when we're in a scenario that our irrigation is drip and we can't get it rained in or irrigated in after application, really got to start thinking about, okay, maybe I go with a heavier pre-plant and fertigate on through the season. However, if I'm in irrigated using a pivot, I definitely want to look at an in-season application around that pinhead square a little bit later. I want a plant to get going. I want that plant to be searching out nitrogen with its roots, establishing a really nice root system. And I want to fertigate, or I want to fertilize based upon how well the crop's looking, and I want to irrigate it in. In a dryland environment, depending on where I'm at, if I'm in far northwest Oklahoma or southwest dryland where rain is not guaranteed, I'm going to play the environment. I might delay nitrogen a little bit, but I'm going to put my side dress on earlier than if I'm in an irrigated scenario. Where I'm at in Stillwater, we had good rain cycles and I was able to get it on perfectly. So I'm excited about getting this research and this data out to the producers. Look at the impact of environment and irrigation type on our management strategies. This nitrogen rate by timing study is a multi-state project where it's going across all the U.S. We're all doing the same type of sampling strategies. We're looking at the soil and the impacts of everything going on, and we could not do that without the support of Cotton Incorporated and the Oklahoma Cotton Council.
Thanks, Brian. Just a question that came to my mind while you were presenting that. We always can see the effects of nitrogen and application and timing with what we see above the ground. Brian, is there any correlation with that timing and root development? Do we see better root development if most of that fertility is put out pre-plant or in season? Have you seen any studies or any data correlating that timing to root development?
Mike, it's like you know what I'm doing in the future. So there are initial studies looking at the impact of delayed nitrogen on crops like wheat and sorghum. We're starting our own studies in the next week to look at wheat, and then we'll move into summer crops, probably sorghum and cotton. Early data coming in is showing that a nitrogen stressed crop will reduce vegetative biomass and increase roots. So you actually get more root. You get the crop trying to explore and find the nitrogen. Like we look at it in dryland wheat and sorghum, that we really don't want a wet fall when we have wheat because we want those roots to establish. You know, when we plant wheat and it just gets these timely little rains, we keep all the roots shallow. We see that in corn and sorghum. Early indication is we might have the same effect with nitrogen, that if we overload the system with readily available nitrogen and there's water, the plant gets a little lazy and may not seek it out. So we've started some studies. We're going to start studies in wheat that will be out this year. in pots, and we'll also do the same thing more than likely next spring in sorghum and cotton. So we are looking that way, and early indication is that there could be a significant impact on root development via nitrogen timing.
Very good. So a question that came in on the chat box, and you talked a lot about the you know, those long-term plots still continue to find fertility down there. So what's take-home message on that long-term study for us as producers? Can we skip 2 or 3 years of nitrogen and still be okay?
Depends. So y'all should know this location. You go to about 4 foot deep, and it's already heavy clay there. It's not a sandy soil by any means, but you get down to 4 foot, and that clay increase is really starting to pick up. We poked some deep holes in that 2 years ago, and any plot that had over 120 pounds, and this was before the 19 crop went in, so that was spring of 19. Any plot that had over 120 pounds still had 200 pounds of residual to 4 foot deep, and it hadn't been fertilized in 6 years. We have a tendency, specifically in our irrigated cotton, to go a little overboard of what the crop needs. And if we're not using it and we're not losing it, if you aren't leaching it out of the system or leaching it down a hill, we're not losing it, so it's there. The long-term also, long-term also shows some great impacts because we have N, P, and K treatments. Great impacts of managing nitrogen and not managing potassium properly. There's plenty of data that says if we over-fertilize with nitrogen and under-fertilize with potassium, we are killing ourselves in terms of quality. And so that's another great story from this long-term, is that we have to look at all nutrients as a whole. And too much nitrogen without balanced potassium causes us more problems. And I do think that we can look at years in certain environments that our quality goes down, potentially due to lack of K management and over application of nitrogen.
And now I think, Brian, that comes back from just, you know, when we pull soil tests, we see extremely high potassium numbers down here. But we always got to remind ourselves that is not always available to the plant. And I think we learn more and more every year about the balance and the proper balance in those soils that the plant needs to fully utilize everything that's out there. So,
yeah, I just throw this out. Everybody should keep in mind that a cotton plant trying to grow 4 or 5 bale cotton is going to pull 3 to 5 pounds of potassium per day during peak load. Cotton roots will go all the way down to 4 or 5 foot, Gary. If you got a good coarse soil, it's going to drop down there 8 foot in cases, but it's an easy 4 foot. That's why most universities and us would recommend, if you can, a 4 foot nitrate sample.
Hey, Brian.
Another question coming out of the chat box, and you kind of answered this a little bit. How deep will cotton roots grow to utilize the deep nitrogen?
Yeah, that's the one I answered, Mike. I think Dr. Taylor's on.
Yeah, so Brian, the zero plots, the checks have always yielded out of that trial, even though they've never, you know, had any fertilizer put on them. What plots out of all those treatments have approached the zeros after 6 to 7 years of no fertilizer?
That's what we got to look at. So looking in there, and this is just visually, Dr. Taylor, just walking through the other day, I could see up to the 80 pound rate still a response in terms of greenness. And so the rates go 20, 40, 60, 80, 120, and 200, I believe. I should have that in front of me. But it's below the 80 pound rate where it really starts dissolving now after not having been fertilized for a solid 7 years. And our yields this year is low. Usually our yields are a little bit better. So we're getting behind the eight ball on that. You guys saw the cotton. Everybody else's cotton looked pretty good. So we're getting behind the 8 ball. So we got to reassess this trial and see where we're at going into 2021.
Other questions? All right, Brian, we greatly thank you for your time and your work that you do. Folks, we're getting ready to wrap up for the day. Just a reminder, tomorrow we'll be dealing with irrigation, 2 studies here at the Altus. One, a quantity study through the drip system, and another one will be a timing study still being utilized with flood irrigation using a combination of temperature canopy sensors as well as moisture sensors. So same time tomorrow, 11:30. You see popped up on your screen a 5-question poll. Shouldn't take you more than about, maybe less than 30 seconds, maybe a minute to complete. If you would do that, it's very helpful in feedback for us for evaluating these type programs. So again, as we close out, a thank you to everybody involved in this, the IT guys, the film guys, certainly the researchers, the department heads that give them the opportunity and the flexibility to make the long drive to Altus to do this work. And certainly thanks to everybody involved. So we will see y'all tomorrow again at 11:30. We'll talk about irrigation. Everybody have a good day. Thank you.